kidding, let me kill that sound. So, what we're going to talk about today is the fact that right now in your labs, if you've gotten to them, you've been running this JSON server. That has been essentially running on localhost 3000, and it is a fully RESTful server, meaning it accepts all resources. Get, post, put, patch, delete. It has zero validations, and no matter what, the route exists, but it won't necessarily do anything. And so we kind of give you that as a resource because you need practice writing the fetch, right? I need practice writing the post request and the get request, the patch, the delete, and all that. So we give you this resource, JSON server, so that you can make these requests to a backend and simulate persisting data. But right now, the idea is that we've already built a server. We already know how to make a database, and we've done it with Rails. You've used the front end, right? And you use the form for the HTML, right? And the collection select, that built you a form in HTML. So the back end is like the controller, right? Like how does it know what to do? And then even hit a database using the ORM active record by using the create, so you're making rows in your database. You're using delete, you're deleting rows in your database. You're even using patch to update certain columns in your database. So let's do this. Very quickly, you'll notice that I have a front end and a back end. And this lecture is great because now you're going to start to see that separation between the front end and the back end. So let's go into this back end folder and let's just make a brand new Rails project. So I can do Rails new, all right? And what do you guys want to make? Otherwise, I'm going to take you to Flavortown. Let's go to Flavortown. Huh? Guy Fieri? Let's go to Flavortown. So Flavortown. Right? Very good. It's going to download. It's going to take a little bit. But the idea is that look at all these things it has to download. Rails is quite bloated with a lot of things. So we'll actually take a look and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. What are some attributes of Flavortown? I think Flavortown is more like a restaurant. So let's just add like nachos as like a model. All right? So stupid. So Rails G. Right? And this time, for the first time, I'm actually going to use it. We like resources, right? Because what does resource build for us? The model, the controller, it gives you resources in your route, builds your migration. It's too powerful. But there's something even more powerful. Have you seen Scaffold? It's too powerful. All right, so let's just talk about nachos. Oh my God. I get paid for this. What is this? Rails G. Scaffold, nacho, and then what attribute does this thing have? It didn't actually build. Yeah, it didn't build. Sure. Cheese, ingredients. I don't know if I spelled that right, but it's fine. Scaffold not work? Oh my goodness, embarrassing. I'm not even in the Rails project. Wow, that was V embarrassing. Sorry, Taurus. All right, great. So I'm going to scaffold out this nacho model. So what Scaffold's going to do is it's going to build literally everything. It's going to build out my controller, all the RESTful routes. It's going to give me the RESTful routes inside my routes file. It's going to build the model, the migration. All I have to do is migrate. And that is going to connect my model to my database with that ORM. So once that's done, I can essentially start the Rails server, which is crazy. So if I do that, let's go to localhost 3000 and see, yay, I'm on Rails. If I know I have a nachos model with a nachos controller, what should the route be? /nachos, right? That's the RESTful route. And what you'll see is I'm getting the index page already, which is insane. I can simply make a new nacho, cheese, yeet, and then what ingredients are in this? Queso, ranch, just a bunch of power. It's gonna be all right. These nachos are too powerful. Don't worry. All right, let's pause the recording. Cool. So if I simply hit create nacho, it's gonna make this brand new nacho, direct me right to the show page, which is like the traditional actions. I am recording. So I can even edit, right? I can put power full if I wanted to. I can update. Wow, successfully updated. I can go back. I can take a look at my index, right? But let's make another nacho. Cheese, always, ingredients, trash can stuff, right? There's literally an ingredient in Guy Fieri's shop. I got an item called trash can nachos. It's scary, I know. He calls it trash can nachos because they're so good, you'll literally eat them out of a trash can. He's freaking wild. All right, so this right here is essentially what you already know, right? There is this index page. It's going to get nacho.all. It's displaying all the nachos. So let's actually take a look at what's going on inside the code. I can open it. Let me start the server back up real quick. And let's take a look. We got app inside my controllers. I can look at my nachos controller. And notice it's just like index, right? Nachos equals nacho.all. And what's it actually doing under the hood here implicitly? It's rendering at nachos, right? That's what it's doing. Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. It's rendering index. I done goofed. It's rendering index. What this means is inside the views folder under nachos, there has to be some sort of index.erb, right? If we take a look, we see views, nachos, there's this index.html.erb, which is doing what you normally do, and that is you're just going through all the nachos, right? For each, you're gonna throw them on to the website. Cool? So let's actually take a look and see, well, let's think. If this is an HTML file, right, because .erb just means that I'm going to embed Ruby into HTML. Theoretically, right, this is HTML. So nachos.html will give me nachos.html. You can even see that it successfully queried starting a get to nachos.html, and it in fact gave me this. I can prove this because if I go to new, and then I simply go to nachos.html from here, it will bring me that index page, right? The idea is that, like last time, literally yesterday, I talked about instead of getting HTML, you could send all types of data, right, to include JSON. So wouldn't it be nice if I got my data that looked a little bit similar to like how we saw it on Reddit with users.json? Instead of an index page that's already built by Rails, I just get the data and then I can add it however I want. So if I'm doing that, let me go to nachos.json and see what I get. Wow. This is the data that I actually want. Yeah? This is the data that I actually want. If I made a fetch request to this and I got these two items in an array, how would you throw it onto your website? How would you add it to the DOM, so to speak? Right. I would do a fetch, right? So this is kind of like what it would look like, right? The idea is that I could simply do a fetch. And what's the URL for this? It's going to be this exact URL. And then as we know, we can chain on then methods. If we want to write that arrow syntax, we can. If you're comfortable with it, I'm going to use the function keyword. So function, and it's going to receive the response. So from here, all I'm going to do is I'm going to take the response and I'm going to return it, rather, response.json. I'm then going to add another function, the callback, and this receives what? What is this data over here? Well, yeah, but what is it though? It's an array of, yes, an array of objects, but more specifically, I would describe them as nachos, right? So if I know the type of data I'm going to get, it makes more sense to name them properly. So I'm going to get nachos back. So I can simply console log nachos. First, it returns that promise, and then it will do the things, the callbacks, and there it is. This is the exact data I'm getting. and it's Rails that's building that for me. So instead of a JSON nebulous server, you can have Rails build your back end, create this JSON data for you, and then you can build a separate front end that makes calls to the Rails server. Here's what I mean. If we take a look, think about this. Ready? You have a front end and a back end. So I can simply open a new tab and I can split it. So let me see here. I think I can just do session, window. Man, I forgot. There was like a shortcut that I had for this. How do I split this thing? I'm using like a different thing. All right, whatever. I think I can right click. There we go. Move session to split pane. Split plane, yes, there it is. Split plane vertically or horizontally. Personally, I like it horizontally, right? And so here's the thing. I can have my backend, so I can CD into my backend. And then here I can go to CD Flatiron School. I know I'm in 06, 03, and then I'm in 27. And then I can CD into my front end. So these two repositories can in fact be managed by different engineering teams. And here is kind of like where that split is. I'm on the front end, and it's just my JavaScript, my indexed, right, my HTML, my CSS, my JavaScript. So if I open this, right, this is what my front end person is looking at. And my front end person is like, oh, cool, I have this like HTML page. And now I'm taking a look. I don't need this. We know that already. What do I need to do in order to get that data from the back end? Well, the back end server has to be up, so the back end responsibilities are falling on the back end engineers. And if their server is up, right, then I should be able to, in fact, make a request. So on my front end, I'm making this request to localhost 3000 /nachos.json. So far, so good. All right? This is a front end repository. I might have never even seen the back end person. I just know that his name is Chet and that he's amazing. That's all I know. I've spoken to him on the phone and I slacked him a couple times and he's like, this is my endpoint, this URL. If you make a request to it, you should receive an array of objects. That's basically what you're gonna get, right? Does this sound familiar in terms of like the deliverables of the labs? Like, hey, make a request to here. Here's a sample response. And then you copy and paste this and go, hey, if you make the request, it should look like this. That's basically what's happening. So the front end and the back end, again, you're starting to see a little bit of a split here. And then if you look, if I do this, well, how is this any different from what we've been doing? All right, we know that this is going to be array of nachos. So we need to slap it on the DOM right here because we know we're getting the nachos here. So far, so good. So I would then need to, right, grab something, right, grab the container from the front end. But remember, the front end person, this is now the front end's job. I now need to build the HTML, the wireframe that I need to add everything to. So if I'm looking at the HTML, I'm like, oh my God, is there anywhere I can put these nachos? Well, I could just put like, you know, like, hey, nachos here. So if you want to see it a little bit clearer, I can do this. The nachos go here. This is the class of nacho container. Notice all the CSSs are with these dashes, Ruby's snake-cased, and then JavaScript's camel-cased. I can even change the ID if I want. Correct. The fetch will be from the front end, asking the back end for information. So if I were to now open up index.html, if I refresh, I have this, and nachos go here. I don't actually need this because I know that this is where it goes, right? I can even delete this if I wanted to. But guess what I'm going to grab? The nachos container. So we can see this come through full circle, where I can ask the document, right? We can query select the ID of the nacho container. Const, right? Like nacho container is equal to this. And then what do I do here? I can just slap it on the DOM right here, right? Now that I have the container and I have the data, I need to create some HTML and append those children. So the front end's responsibility is really like, hey, what does my HTML look like? How am I styling it? What CSS am I putting? How am I moving the divs? Right? Like, where's everything go? What color? What's the font? What's being displayed? How big are the buttons? And then I'm just going to go grab that data. So bringing it all the way around, this is the front end. This is what the user sees. I've got a nav bar. I've got a clickable followers, a clickable likes. Right? I have an image. But where does this come from? Well, the back end built it, right? This is a show page for Coffee Dad. So the back end means that on the back end, I need to send the number of tweets this person has, the number of followers, the number of likes, and the first 20 tweets. I need to create an endpoint for this so that the front end makes a fetch request to twitter.com/ and then like user ID 99, and they should see something that looks like this, that has the likes, the followers, some tweets that's in an array, and then I can add it to the DOM appropriately. So far, so good.
Is it anywhere to see pages backend?
That's proprietary information, brother. You can't really see their backend, no. You'd have to have access to it. That's why the database has like passwords. Yeah? But right now, there's no real password setup because you're just developing locally. Once you learn how to push to production, you want to start locking down and securing those things. But speaking of security, right, let's transition. Are there any questions as to like what the front end person does, what the back end person does, and kind of like where that split is starting to happen?
Is there an equivalent to ERB with JavaScript, or do you just handle it all in separate files?
Let's talk about the fact that right now, let's do this. I can be in my Rails backend, right? I can go into Flavortown. And if I open my backend repo, if I'm just going to be making these fetch requests to add on to HTML for the front end, do I need this? Do I need any of the HTML ERB files? Do I need form 4? Do I need collection select? No, because somebody on the front end is building the HTML. All I have to do is set up the data for them to fetch to, and it's their job to slap on the DOM and make that user experience come to life. So there is a way to actually remove all of the bloat from Rails, and that is, we'll have to unfortunately create a new project. Boop, boop. All right, so we'll CD out of this. So instead, in my backend, I can do Rails new. All right, I can put flavor 2, right? And then I can tell it I don't need any of that action view library. I don't need any of the Rails front end because I have a separate front end department that has their own HTML, CSS, JavaScript. All I really need is to make Rails an API. I just need the controller, I need the model, and I need that database. That's all I really need. So I can give it the -- API flag. And what you'll see is it'll actually build a brand new Rails project. But if you look closely, it removes a lot of things. Why do I need a 404 error page if my front end's going to handle all the HTML? I don't need any of the action view folders, right? I don't need the view folder at all. So I'm just going to remove it. So that way my Rails is just a little bit lighter. There's other things it gets rid of, and there are other configurations it does, but that's sort of the idea behind this API flag? Are there any questions as to why we're using the dash dash API flag for our Rails backend? Who feels comfortable as to why we're doing that? Yeah? Rails as just a front end? If there is, I don't know about it, but to be fair, I don't really know everything about Rails. There's so much to learn. Sure. All I did was I did Rails new, as you know and love it. I gave it the project name, and then I gave it this dash dash API flag. Meaning, when you build Rails, when you build this new project, get rid of everything from the front end and change a couple configurations so that I'm just using Rails as an API. This is designed to minimize like unnecessary files that you're definitely not going to be using. You know?
My earlier question, I guess, to clarify, I obviously really enjoyed like the conditional HTML that you generated, like being able to kind of look through a file and see like how the interact with the controller. Is there anything like that with JavaScript and HTML?
How, what interacted with what?
Like it was just nice to be able to see like conditionals and then what code it would generate, like in an ERB file.
Oh, got it. Okay, so the question is, it was really nice to see, like, basically you have this, and then you can very easily do something like what is it? What the? Yeah, something like this, right? Where you can do if, right? And then you can put a condition like if nachos, right, dot length is less than 10, then show all the nachos, right? Otherwise, say, yo, there's like 20 nachos and then paginate them or something like that, right? You can easily add conditions here. Well, here's the beautiful thing. This all is the front end, right? This is the HTML. Where's the HTML live now? In the front end or in the back end? In the front end. So if I were to go into my front end, I'm taking a look at this. Let's take a look right here. This is where I'm going to add all the nachos. Yeah? I can simply do my ifs here. If nachos, remember, because this is what I'm getting back. If nachos dot length, right, is less than 10, I'm sorry, JavaScript needs these parentheses. Then you do whatever you want. Finance, yeah.
It's just so nice, like to be able to like look for an HTML file and like see kind of what was going to happen. But I guess separation of duties.
Correct. The separation of duties now. The front end has a responsibility, and there's so much logic here. So the point that I would like to make, right, that you're pointing out is, my God, the front end has all this logic. The back end has all this logic. If you build Rails with the front end and the back end in one full package, and you have everything built on this one folder, that is what is known as like a monolithic app. You have this monolith where Rails does your front end, Rails does your back end, Rails does all your API calls. It's huge. If you start to separate the front end and the back end, and then you also make API calls to like a bunch of third parties, you're starting to talk about what is known as microservices. So I'm not going to dive too much into that, but that's the pros and cons, right? If you have them separated, they kind of become harder to manage, but then you can separate the responsibilities. If they're together, it's a bit easier to manage, and you only need to hire someone that can write Rails. So maybe it's cheaper in that way. There's a lot of pros and cons. Cool. So let's not get too crazy into this. Let's actually take a look at this API. Ready? I have Flavortown and Flavor 2. If I cd into Flavor 2, let's take a look at what those differences are. So I've got Flavor 2 and Flavortown, right? This is the API, and this right here is going to be the regular one. If I look at the application controller, look where I'm pulling from. Action controller base. Interesting. If I take a look at my app here, and I have no controllers, embarrassing. It pulls from Action Controller API. So it's pulling from a different part of what this Action Controller is. If I take a look at my views, right, I should see the fact that there's layouts, and they're just mailer layouts. So I still have action mailer, which allows me to send emails with Rails, but I don't really have this application HTML ERB anymore. I don't have this body yield because I don't need it. There's nothing for me to send in terms of HTML. So far, so good. So let's just continue. Now I need to like build out this API version. So I'm actually gonna completely get rid of this. And what I'm gonna do is, let's actually go into the back end. And do I need to use resources now, or can I use scaffold? Well, if I use scaffold, I use resources. Remember, it builds the view folder for me, which I don't need. Now I should be specifying just the things that I need, which in terms of the back end is going to be the model, and it's just going to be the controller. So I can Rails G the model. And here, again, for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to put, do you guys want nachos or burgers? Fries? Nachos? Nachos. Cool. So what are the attributes of nachos? Just put name and cheese, right? Very complicated people. Cheese is a Boolean. Wow. Bless up. So I have this model. And then what else do I need? I need the controller, right? So, oh man, wow, it's so powerful. Look at this. Models are singular, and it corrected that for me. Bless up, Lord Rails. All right, so I have nachos. Bless up, Lord Rails. You can add arguments to nachos, the controller, and that's actually going to be the method to build. So if you put like index and show, it'll build you index and show. So powerful. Anyways, so let's actually take a look at what's going on over here. Nachos controller, very good. But what if, right, I'm building out this API now. If we think about it, your API occasionally can get deprecated. Like what I mean by that is, let's take a look. I think GitHub does it. Yeah. So there are different versions for your API, right? Meaning you have like 1,000 users right now hitting your endpoint, right? They're making fetch to, you know, chet slash version 1 slash like students or whatever it is. If I ever need to upgrade, I can't actually take the API down. If I want to rename something, I can't take it down, because if I take it down, it breaks. So what I need to do is I need to make another version of it and then tell people, hey, start using version 2. And this is how version 2 works. And that way, after 1 year, I can be like, look, listen, you've had a year now. I'm taking API version 1 down. And then you take it down. So for scalability, your backend should have different versions. And the way you simply do that is just by adding versions to it. So if I wanted to, I can Rails G controller, and I could tell it this is going to be an API, and it's going to be version 1. So I'm just giving it additional parameters. So, bloop. And this is what it's going to build for me instead. I can see I have an API nested folder. I can see I have a version 1 nested folder. And then I see nachos controller. So it's simply API v1 nachos controller. Cool? There is no v1 class. This is just the namespace saying inside v1, inside API, there's a version 1. Meaning, theoretically, I can have inside API a version 2, a version 3, a version 4. So I can serve all my different users as I continue to add, one of my favorite things in development, more features. Yeah? Okay, so is that one of you guys, or? Oh, okay. Cool, great. So before I kind of do anything, I should migrate my database. Bloop, bloop, bloop. Powerful. So I'm going to start the server. But right now, we actually need to like send back some stuff, right? How do we get this API to build? How do we start it from scratch? Well, the first and easiest thing is to do def index, no big deal. And what we want to do is we want to send back all the nachos in index, like normal, right? So a little at nachos equals to nacho.all. But now what are we rendering? We're rendering an index.erb file. What do we want to send back? What type of data are we sending back? A text file? We're sending back JSON. So what I want to do is render, and I want to render JSON. But what JSON do I want to render? I want to render, I have to send back all the nachos. Do I have a variable that is currently holding all my nachos? So what this is saying is index is just going to get everything from the database, right? Remember the two responsibilities. What do I need from the model? And then what is the response? If somebody hits index, it's going to grab all the nachos, and then it's going to send back a JSON file of all the nachos so that hopefully it should look something like this. Instead of the nachos.html, which we saw was like a view page. We don't want that anymore. We're just a back end. We just want the data so that the front end can do whatever they want with it and make it sexy. So that eventually they can create a user experience where eventually on trigger of certain events, things can happen. So for example, scrolling is an event. Clicking is an event. If the user scrolls to the bottom of the page, it makes another request. And it sends more tweets, which just gets slapped to the DOM. If I scroll again, I get more tweets, and I just slap it to the DOM. That's basically just what's happening in this whole request response cycle. There's a secret fetch going on that's happening on scroll. And we know how to add event listeners, and we know what the event is, so all we have to do is figure out what's in the callback. And the callback is just going to make a fetch, get the next 20 tweets, and then slap it on the DOM. Do you feel like you have an idea of how to implement this sort of infinite scroll feature now? Right? That's the front end working, and that's the back end working differently. The back end has to feed you 20 tweets at a time, and the front end is just going to get them and slap them on the DOM. Right? So now the front end and the back end should be like, oh my God, I'm starting to see it. But when you were learning it in Mod 2, you were full stack. You were doing the front end and the back end, and you kind of didn't really know where it split. But now it should start to be fairly clear. So just continuing on. Let's see actually what happens here. Is there currently a route that's pointing to API v1 nachos controller with the nachos index? How can I make a GET request and hit this controller action? I need to make a route for it. You love Rails. Stop playing. So I go into my routes file, and I go, oh my goodness, where are the routes? I can do a GET to slash, whatever I want. I can name this anything I want. Remember, they're just custom routes now. So I'm going to put Benny, who's actually Vera. And what controller action do I want it to point to? That's the action. I want to point it to the index action, but what controller do I want to point to? Is it the nachos controller, or is it the API v1 nachos controller? That one, right? So now it becomes really tricky because then I have to do like API v1 nachos controller, and I have to do the index. All right, think about it. If I do a get to, I don't know, I also have to do API v1 nachos, and this is just going to go to the show. All right, I always have to do this like API v1 nachos, API v1 nachos. If I ever need to change anything, I have to go into API v1 nachos. So there must be a better way. TM. Remember, the idea is that I want to extract API and v1 away, so I only have to deal with the controller in question. So let's see what we have. Rails namespacing routes. Let's just go to the Ruby guides. Let's go to namespace. Bloop. Oh my goodness. If I have something called namespace for admin and I put resources articles, this is what it will build for me. A path. But look at the controller action. Admin / articles. Instead of admin, what if I had API / articles? What if I had a namespace of API right here? If this was like API or something. Well, let's rip that bad boy like good developers do and do this. Oh, thank you. All right, I'm just gonna go bloop. But is that enough? I need one more. And that's going to be v1. But I don't want to forget to end because that'll break my code and that's embarrassing. But now I don't need this. I need what? Sure, let's do resources first, all right? Because we love resources, right? Just love them. Just love them. Before we do anything else, right, because we've written a lot of code, I just want to test this, and I want to see if it matches up to the hard-coded routes I've written. Where can I go and check my Rails routes? All right, I can go to localhost 3000. I can check Rails, check some info, and check those routes. And look at that. I've got /Benny, which is fine, but what am I looking for specifically? API v1 nachos, the controller actions. But look at what this one builds me. API v1 nachos path is a get to API v1 nachos, which also gives me API v1 nachos index. These are identical. So this namespace is actually building this for me. Why did I put what? Oh, this is just, I'm just writing it this way because it's easier to read. You see where the do's and the ends are. In theory, you can write all your code in one line. You know, it should be crazy, but you can't. All right, so the idea here is that now we have this API, now we have this v1, right? We have the route, we have the controller action, and we have the controller action doing something. So let's test. How can I actually test whether or not this is returning anything? What route do I need to hit? I can hit this route, which will point me. If I hit this route, it's going to give me what controller and what action. It's going to give me API v1 controller, and it's going to be the index action. If I hit Benny, it's going to hit what controller action. So the easier thing to do would simply go to localhost 3000 /, and I see this empty array. Why would this array be empty? So I made no nachos, obviously, so we can do that. Remember, this is just Rails, the Rails you already know. If I don't want to bother with that create form and all that other nonsense, how can I create something in Rails? I can go right into the Rails console. So, bloop. And let me just do nacho.new because I forgot the attributes for it. Nacho.create. There are no validations, so this will work like a dirtbag, but whatever. Name. What kind of nachos do you guys want? It's almost lunch.
Spicy.
Okay. Spicy. Does it have cheese?
No.
No? Sure. All right. Let's have another one. High fiber nachos. This is an interesting class. Cheese. Yeah, definitely cheese, obviously. I mean, that's normal, right? Just like everything else we just said. If I start the server back up, right, what should be there now? High fiber nachos. Boom. Oh my goodness. Powerful. So we can actually test this, right? And this is the data that we expect to see, right? And what's the command? Oh, wow. You like that? But what's the route we need to hit? Is it still nachos.json? What is it? Okay. I'm just going to parse it, right? Why am I parsing this now? Why is this JSON data? Why is the back end sending me JSON? Because we told it to, right? Now, do we understand why the JSON's coming back? It's because you sent it as JSON. So, continuing this, if I console log, I'm going to see, oh my goodness, high fiber nachos. Crazy. Let's do this. Let's go to another website, like, trying to think of something I'm not logged into. Or we just do this, Facebook. Smart. If, however, whoa! Wow, that was intense. If I take this exact command, let's think about this, right? When I was here on this page, what is the domain that I am on? I'm on localhost 3000. So does it make sense that localhost 3000 is safe to make requests to localhost 3000? Would you trust localhost 3000 making requests to localhost 3000? Yeah, right? If I had a website like evanswang.com, please don't go there, and I made a request that was like, danger ops. If I made a request from evanswang.com by front end to my back end located at evanswang.com, do you consider that inherently safe? Yeah, absolutely, right? But what if I'm on bookface.com? Should I make a request to localhost 3000? Is that considered safe? Any other domain making a request to my back end, okay? Making a request to my database. Sorry, this gets really dicey when you keep saying, like, you know, get stuff from my backend. Okay? Anyway, so let's just say Facebook is trying to make a request to my database. Should I allow that?
No.
Oh my goodness, look at this. Ridiculous. There's some sort of error. Rejected. It doesn't like it. It's unsafe. So it blocks it, and it should have blocked it from, actually, Facebook does some additional security. So let's go to a website that's maybe not so secure. I don't know. The New York Times, is that going to be okay? Oh yeah, it's fine. It's fine. So if I do this, it also blocks it. New York Times is pretty secure. I don't know.
Status wrappers.
Status wrappers, is that something? Okay, great. It doesn't seem to want to work. It's fine. Okay, that's fine. The idea is that, like, this website is maybe not so super secure, and I typed it wrong. But what's blocking it is something called a CORS policy. And what CORS stands for is cross-origin resource sharing, which makes sense, right? The domain that I was on, the origin I came from, was localhost 3000. And the person that's making this request is statuswrappers.com. That's their origin. So if we have different origins, cross-origin, I do not want to share any of my resources, my database, my backend, with you. I have to specifically whitelist them. I have to let them know, hey, you know what? If Vera and Chet want to make a request to my database, like, now it's weird because you're real. Idiot! If Vera and Chet want to make a request to my database, I know them and I trust them. So how can I whitelist them? How can I let them know that if you want to make a request to my DB, it's good to go. Well, we see something called this CORS policy, right? So like, let's just look it up, right? If I was a developer, I'm like, oh my God, something went wrong with CORS, I would simply go Rails CORS and figure out what happened with my Rails and CORS. I see this very powerful GitHub that I've obviously clicked on already, but it provides support for cross-origin resource sharing for Rack-compatible web applications. Well, Rails is a Rack-compatible Rails application because it was built on Rack, and this is the problem I'm trying to solve. So let's see how we can actually fix it. Oh my goodness, I need to install the gem or add this to my gem file. Great. So I'm just gonna look at my gem file. I'm gonna see, oh my goodness, it's already there. I just have to uncomment it. If it wasn't there, I would simply paste it in. Well, if I add something to my gem file, what should I do now? Right, I can simply boondle install. And then I'm gonna start my server back up. Okay? If I don't really know what I'm doing, I'm gonna read the README. And it says, put something like this. Literally the words, put something like this. In your config application folder. Okay, well, let me look inside my file structure in my backend. Right, now you're starting to see the front and the back end are like still super separate. They have different responsibilities. I see config, and I see environment, initializers, boop, local, boop. In my environment, there's another file I'm looking for. Yeah, it's in initializers. Yeah, look, so check it out. It says something in your config application, you should put something like this. But remember how I said the -- API flag changes a couple things from your regular Rails app? This is one of them. If I go in my config, in my initializers, I see a file called CORS. If I take a look at this right here, and I take a look at the CORS file, they look very similar. And so I simply need to just pull that code in. And this is what's going on. In my Rails application, specifically the configurations, I'm going to insert something that happens between the requests, in the middle. And what I want to do is I want to have my Rack CORS gem do something. And that is simply going to allow example.com to make requests to me. But here, what if I wanted maybe Chet is the benniest.com? Possibly. Or I can just be like, you know what? This is an open source API and anyone can make this request. What resources? Well, all of them. And now I can make a get, post, put, patch, delete to any of my routes. If I'm talking about like the new age, which is like the freemium of like how software engineering is now, it's like, great, I'm gonna let you do this. I'm gonna let you only do 100 requests, and then I'm gonna make you start paying. I can track a lot of these things, but I can also do this. If Vera is paying me, I'm gonna allow her to post. Sorry, I have to be very selective of like the words I use. I'm gonna allow her to post to my database. So I can simply do, whoop, I'm gonna allow only, right, Vera.com to get and post. Everybody else gets only the get. Because Vera's paying me, I'm allowing her to do additional functionality with my API. All right, so there's ways to configure it. I don't want to get too into the weeds, but just understand that this is kind of like one of those things that you can configure as you start to scale out your application. But for right now, we're going to open everything. All right? If that's the case, and this happens to me often, a lot of my Mod 5 students are like, hey, CORS is still busted. And I go, have you restarted your server? And they go, no. And I'm like, okay. Shut it down and restart it, let me know. Shut it down and restart. So now, in theory, where's that terrible wrap? You know what? Wrappers, HTTP, some fake website, whatever, right? I should no longer get that cross-origin error. and I don't. Because I now have cores enabled. All right, just by show of hands, you feel okay about like cores and how to get around it? Or like what cores are? Remember, HTTP wrappers is not a domain I necessarily trust. So inherently it will block it. But I can go into my course file and say, you know what, I'm gonna open source my API. I'm gonna let anybody make a request to me. And so I put the star there. Or I can specify certain domains and what they're allowed to do to my application. Okay. So, told you there's a lot here. All right, so now that we've got the cores issue fixed, the other thing I want to talk about before we start making more complicated fetch requests is the fact that some of you have built auth into your applications, right? And you have some sort of user model. What are some of the attributes of this user model? Name, and then everyone possibly has password digest, right, which is a hassified string. Let's actually take a look closely as to what the response is that you get. I see cheese created at ID name updated at. If I made a request to users, guess what attribute gets sent over the web? All of them. All of them. ID gets sent, name gets sent, email address gets sent, password digest gets sent. If I don't want to send every single attribute, I have to control and shape the data and the object that I send. What I mean by that is instead of sending cheese created at ID name, what if I made the request and I only wanted to send the name attribute? I don't need to send any other attribute. The idea behind that is something called a serializer. So Rails has one built in. So Rails serializer. And what you'll see is this active model serializer. And you're like, okay, cool. Unfortunately, Netflix also made one. So when we're going to take a look at Netflix, I think a lab came out on this, but the one thing I want to point out is when Rails sends 250 records, it takes them 138 milliseconds. If I'm serializing the data, if I'm changing the shape of it. If I use FastJSON API, those exact same 250 records takes 3 milliseconds. You can see that the savings are a ton, but this scales incredibly, right? If I have literally 10,000 records, this is going to take over a second or two, while this is still going to maintain still even less than half a second. And so it's just faster. So either one, they're extremely easy to use, and they're almost exactly the same. That being said, I'm just going to teach you the FastJSON API. There's also a lab for it, but let's just go through it. How do I use it? This is why documentation is so important. Add this to your gem file. Wow, so far, so good. My gem file. I know this is not in here, so I'm just going to do it. Which means I need to bundle install. That's right, I'm going to bundle. Very good. I'm also going to start my server back up, which I probably shouldn't do. So the next thing is, right, usage. Bless up. You can use the bundle generator on your Rails project. Rails G serializer, the model name, and any attributes that you actually want to send. So let's do that. Remember, I have two attributes on my nacho model. But what do I actually want to send over? Maybe the name or maybe just cheese. What would you like to send? Sure, let's just send the cheese, which is a Boolean. So you're like, hey, what kind of nacho is this? It's cheesy, don't worry, just take it. What's up?
So earlier, like, we had to send all the information, like the what was it, the ID and all the other attributes. Here you're just sending, you just pick and choose what you want to send.
That's exactly correct. You can pick and choose what you want to send. So let's see how it works. Ready? Inside the serializer, look what it made. In apps, there's a new folder called serializers. Nacho serializer. So let's take a look at that file. Inside my folder, I should have a new in-app serializer folder. So I take a look at serializers, I see Nacho serializer, and it just says attributes cheese. That's it. So, how do we actually use this? Well, you have to run return to serialized JSON. And this is the output that it should send if I put the object in. So let's actually take a look and make that happen. In my Nachos controller, what I need is, still from the model, I'm going to put serialized data. Sorry, it's Rails. And that's just going to be the Nacho serializer dot new, taking in what possible object? Nachos. All right, and I'm going to run dot serialized JSON. Exactly as it says right here. So am I still rendering at Nachos? I should render this data here. I'm going to send this data back and not at Nachos. So let's take a look at how that changed our data. Instead of the ID, name, cheese, created, updated at, what should we expect to see? Okay, just kidding, the Rails server wasn't up. That ruined my moment. Embarrassing. And you get just the cheese. If you wanted to send the other attributes, you would simply go into the serializer, and you could say, also, don't forget to send the name. And if I refresh, I get the cheese and the name. And now it's like in that data format that I can use on my front end. I don't know. How are we feeling about serializers and why we would need them?
So if you don't want to customize your data at all, if you just want to send a full object, is it still faster to use a serializer?
No, if you send just the object, it's fast. That's the fastest. This is going to wrap it and then shape the data and then send it. It's that sort of middle ground. But obviously, you want to shape your data. You don't always want to send every single attribute over. Cool? Any questions on serializers? All right, why would we use them? How would we use them? All right, fast JSON API, it's a gem. Then you wrap the object in your controller, and then you send that data over. We talked about front end and back end being separate, and how the front end is going to make a request to now Benny, right? Because we made that custom route. If we didn't have that custom route and I wasn't being so ridiculous, what route will we send them to? Well, if you're not sure, we can always check the routes. And if I want to hit the index action, I need to go to /API/nachos. So if I'm here, I should go to /API/v1 nachos. We'll hit the exact same controller action and send me back the same data. Here, I would then just take it and slap it on the DOM accordingly. I said I don't want to send over all the attributes. Correct. That's why we originally just picked cheese, but we can choose what we want to send. This is also important because if nachos belong to an eater or something like that, then you would have to establish the relationship here. So in your model, you would have like belongs to like hungry man, and then in Nacho serializer, you would also have to put belongs to whatever the model name is. And that will nest your data accordingly. So like if we look back at the docs, this is the course one, sorry. right? You have all this. If you have some sort of relationship, like has many or belongs to, then you can like add it in a certain way. It'll tell you, and then it should tell you what that object looks like. Huh. There's no example of it, but the Reddit one will be like that. So it'll like nest it, right? So like in your data, you can have icon as like a has many, and then it'll come up with an array of those has many objects.
Wait, isn't like a common practice for the API to have like all of the data in like an array of objects?
Yes. It is common practice to have a bulk of your data in like an array of objects. All right, so we covered a lot today, and so this afternoon we'll have to continue, and we'll pick up right where we left off. We will take a look at these routes and how it's more than just get, right? You have the create action, you have the update action. How do we actually use fetch now to send more than the get request? How do we hit the correct controller actions and tie it into the back end? So we'll book some time for that. But are there any other questions about having Rails just be an API and how it's separate from the front end? There's two repos, two different teams. One's HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and the other one's handling the model, the serializer, the routes, the controller action, and a majority of the business logic.
So you have the two different like directories for the front and the back end.
Mm-hmm.
How do they need to be like stored in a certain way so that they can refer to each other, or?
They do not. The front end and the back end do not have to be stored in a specific way for them to reference each other, because the way they're going to reference each other is literally through this,
Okay.
right? Like whatever my Rails server is on, whatever my back-end database is on, I'm going to tell my front end, this is the endpoint. Hit this endpoint, and I will take care of the rest. That's my job as a back-end developer, right? You hit my endpoint, I will tell it what controller action to hit, and then in that controller action, the logic that happens, and how I shape the response, and then I tell you as a front-end developer, if you hit that endpoint, this is the type of response you are expected to get. So then the front end just goes, great, fetch to there, and if I see the shape of the data, I can know how to get through it. All right, because now nachos is going to be in this format. It's going to be in this format. So if I'm in nachos, which is this, I need to go into nachos. I need to go into a key of data. Okay, that's the old app. And then if I want it, right, inside data, there is an array. If that's the case, then that must mean that I need to go through the first item, and I can ask for that first item's ID. And so because I can see the shape of the data on the front end, I know how to access what I want. And then now I can slap it to the DOM accordingly. All right? If I wanted to, I can put, instead of ID, I can put attributes dot cheese. And that will give me the object, the data, the first item, the attribute dot cheese will be null, unfortunately, because I was being silly. But that's what's happening. All right, there's a lot of information. Feel free to take it's like a few extra minutes for lunch, and then I will slack out a time for when we can continue. All right? Cool, thank you.